We often look to the past to understand ourselves. Tonight, we turn our attention to the year 1880 and the solemn story of John Gill. It's a case that reminds us that behind historical records are real people, whose lives were irrevocably changed by the events that transpired. This is their story, as best as it can be told. The city of Bradford, in West Yorkshire, England, was a titan of the industrial age. Its skyline was a forest of mill chimneys, spewing smoke and soot that painted the sky a permanent shade of gray. This was the heart of the world's wool trade, a place of immense wealth and grinding poverty, where life was dictated by the roar of machinery and the shrill sound of the factory whistle. In the district of Manningham, amidst the tightly packed terraced houses, lived the Gill family. Like so many others, they were a working-class family, their lives modest and unassuming. Their 8-year-old son, John, known to all as Johnny, was a bright and lively boy, well-liked in his neighborhood, and a student at the local school. His world was one of cobblestone streets and corner shops. A childhood lived in the shadow of the great mills. On the morning of Monday, December 27th, 1880, the Christmas festivities were still fresh in the air. For Johnny Gill, it was a day of freedom from school, a chance for play. He left his home on St. Stephen's Road with a simple task: to run an errand for his mother at the local grocer's shop on Lum Lane. It was a short, familiar journey he had made countless times. After completing his errand, he was seen by friends, happily playing in the streets with the Christmas toys he had recently received. His parents, Thomas and Mary Gill, expected him home for dinner. But as midday came and went, there was no sign of Johnny. The hours stretched into a long, anxious afternoon. As dusk fell over Bradford, casting long shadows from the towering mills, a simple delay had turned into a terrifying absence. Johnny Gill had vanished. His parents, now frantic with worry, began a desperate search, their calls echoing in the cold, dark streets. The initial search by Johnny's parents expanded. Neighbors, hearing the Gills' distressed cries, left the warmth of their homes to join the effort. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness as the search party grew, their lights cutting feeble paths through the smog-filled alleyways and backstreets of Manningham. The local police were alerted, and constables began their own methodical inquiries, knocking on doors and questioning anyone who might have seen the boy. The following day, the search intensified dramatically. Hundreds of local residents, moved by the plight of the Gill family, volunteered their time. They fanned out across the district, looking in every yard, shed, and outbuilding. The canals were dragged, and the open fields on the edge of the city were scoured. Handbills bearing Johnny Gill's description were printed and posted throughout Bradford. A palpable sense of dread settled over the community as the search entered its second day, with no news, no sightings, and no answers. On the morning of Wednesday, December 29th, 2 full days after Johnny had disappeared, the search took a devastating turn. A local man, Joseph Buck, had sent his son to the stable of the Manningham Old Hall, a nearby property, to retrieve some manure for his garden. The stable was a stone building, familiar to local children as a place to play. While in the loft, the boy made a horrifying discovery. Partially hidden beneath the pile of hay and sacking, he found the small, still body of a child. He ran home in terror, and his father immediately summoned the police. The authorities arrived to find a scene of profound tragedy. The body was that of young Johnny Gill. His clothes were disheveled, and it was clear he had not died of natural causes. The news spread through Manningham like a shockwave, turning the community's fear and hope into grief and outrage. The search for a missing boy was over. The hunt for his killer had just begun. The investigation into the murder of Johnny Gill was led by Bradford's chief constable, Mr. James Withers. The stable loft was sealed off as detectives began the grim task of examining the scene. Dr. Henry Churton, the police surgeon, was called to perform a post-mortem examination. His findings confirmed the community's worst fears. Johnny had sustained injuries to his head, but the cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation. More distressingly, the examination revealed that the boy's body had been severely mutilated after his death. This shocking detail added a layer of profound horror to the crime, suggesting a killer not only of immense cruelty, but also of a deeply disturbed mind. The motive was a complete mystery. Johnny came from a poor family, and robbery was immediately ruled out. The police were faced with a crime of seemingly motiveless brutality, a type of act that was deeply unsettling to the Victorian public and the authorities tasked with protecting them. With little physical evidence to go on, the police focused on establishing a timeline of Johnny's last known movements. They began the painstaking process of re-interviewing his friends and anyone who had been near Lum Lane on the day he disappeared. Their breakthrough came from one of Johnny's playmates, a boy named William Barnett. Barnett told the police that on Monday morning he had seen Johnny talking to another boy, William Moore. Moore was a mill hand who worked at the nearby Drummond's Mill, a place Johnny's father also worked. Barnett's account was crucial. He stated that he saw Moore and Gill together, heading in the direction of the Old Hall stables. This testimony provided the first tangible lead in the case, shifting the focus of the investigation from a faceless predator to a specific, named individual who was known within the community. The police now had a prime suspect. William Moore was a 19-year-old mill worker. He was known to be quiet and unremarkable, with no prior history of serious trouble with the law. When the police first approached him, he calmly denied having seen Johnny Gill on the day of his disappearance. He claimed he had been at work at Drummond's Mill all day and provided an alibi. However, investigators soon found inconsistencies in his story. His co-workers at the mill confirmed that Moore had been absent from his post for a significant period on that Monday morning. As the police pressed him, Moore's composure began to crack. Detectives also learned of a trivial but significant detail. It was known among the local boys that Moore had recently accused Johnny Gill of stealing some of his prized marbles. In a world where a child's possessions were few, such a dispute could be a matter of intense playground politics. To the police, it offered the first hint of a possible, albeit disturbingly petty, motive for a confrontation. Faced with the collapse of his alibi and the testimony of William Barnett, William Moore was taken into custody for further questioning. At the Bradford Town Hall, under intense interrogation by Chief Constable Withers, Moore's denials finally gave way to a full confession. His account of the events was chilling in its simplicity and brutality. He admitted to luring Johnny to the stable loft under the pretense of looking for pigeons. Once there, he confronted the younger boy about the marbles. When Johnny denied taking them, Moore flew into a rage. He struck Johnny, knocking him unconscious, and then, in a fit of panic and rage, suffocated him. The horrific mutilations that followed were, in his own confused account, a desperate and depraved attempt to conceal the body, or perhaps an act of pure, unthinking violence. The confession was a shocking revelation. The monstrous crime that had terrorized Bradford was not the work of a shadowy maniac, but of a local teenager, driven by a childish argument over a handful of glass marbles. The trial of William Moore for the murder of John Gill began in March 1881 at the Leeds Assizes. The case had garnered national attention, and the courtroom was packed with journalists and a morbidly curious public. The prosecution, led by Mr. A. W. Wills, laid out the evidence meticulously. The witness testimony placing Moore with Gill, the failed alibi, and the detailed confession Moore had signed. Moore's defense attorney, Mr. Waddy, faced an impossible task. The confession was damning. His only viable strategy was to argue that Moore was not of sound mind, that the sheer senselessness of the act and its horrific aftermath were proof of insanity. However, under the legal standards of the time, this defense failed to convince the jury. After a short deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of willful murder. The judge, wearing the black cap, sentenced William Moore to death by hanging. Moore reportedly showed little emotion as his fate was sealed. On August 13, 1881, William Moore was executed at Armley Gaol in Leeds. He was 20 years old. The murder of Johnny Gill left a deep and lasting scar on the community of Bradford. It was a crime that shattered the Victorian era's perception of childhood innocence, revealing a capacity for darkness in the most unexpected of places. The senseless motive, a dispute over marbles, made the tragedy even more poignant and difficult to comprehend. The case became a grim local legend, a cautionary tale passed down through generations. The memory of Johnny Gill, an 8-year-old boy who went out to run a simple errand and never came home, serves as a solemn reminder of the fragility of life and the profound loss that a single, senseless act of violence can inflict upon a family and an entire community. Thank you for spending this time with us. Reflecting on these past events is a way of remembering the individuals involved and the impact their stories had on their communities. If you have any thoughts on today's case, we invite you to share them respectfully in the comments below. We hope you will join us again for our next true crime case.